Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Dr. Almitra Berry, motivational speaker, author, podcast host, and consultant on the topic of culturally and linguistically diverse learners in America's K 12 education system. Welcome to the show, Dr. Almitra.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Welcome to the show. Welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll be talking about transforming urban education. So we'll talk about this. We'll learn a lot about you, all this from you, Dr. Almitra. But before that, let's learn a bit about you for the audience so that they know who they are listening to.
Sure. What do you want to know? I
Just
am
a bit of your journey, a bit of your background.
sure. I started out as an elementary school teacher. Actually, I started out in the high school, and I know that varies from country to country, but basically teaching 15 to 18-year-olds and focused on history. But one of the things that I found was that too many of my students could not read well enough to understand the instruction, the subject matter. So I decided to move down and work with lower grades and then focusing on teaching children who had not learned how to read when they were supposed to, how to read as teenagers, basically. What I found and why I started to focus on culturally and linguistically diverse learners was finding that our systems were not set up to address the needs of children who did not speak the English of school. And while that varies from country to country, it almost doesn't matter where we are, that there are children who don't speak the same language that's expected to be spoken in school, even if it is, in our case, some form of English. So that set me about on this journey into more research and understanding of why this happens in our school systems and how children are damaged in the long run. So that's where I started.
Right. So, for the people who are outside the US who do not know
Yeah.
much about the education system, how do they understand? What is the issue? There are public schools, there are private schools. People can go to whichever school they want to, whichever one they can afford, and there are good teachers everywhere. They teach. You have been a teacher there. So, where is the problem here?
Well, there are two places where there's a problem. One is our schools of education that don't properly prepare pre-service teachers, college students who want to teach, to go into the classrooms and teach the students that they have. The second is that very often in our schools, there's politics going on. There are people who are in control, and I'm talking on the public school. And as you mentioned, there are private schools, absolutely. But private schools in the United States often cost a lot of money, and people can't afford to access them. And so, certainly, when my focus has always been on the children who are most often overlooked, the children who have lower income levels in their families, very often, we're talking about students who have come to the United States from another country, so they're immigrant learners, and again, who may speak a language other than English, whether it's Spanish or French or Eastern European language, it doesn't matter, something other than English, but also children who speak English, but not the sort of business English of America. So the disconnect is in a bunch of places. It's political. It's also academic, that some people don't believe that we need to teach children how to read like you would any other science, that children should just pick it up. And if you read a lot to them, they'll figure it out on their own. So there's all these different places that need to be addressed.
Right. And how do you address them? Uh, is it that it is happening just by because it is happening, or is it there is a particular lobby, particular group? You talked about politics. You talked about academics. So do they want to continue with a system that is benefiting them and not the students?
Yeah, well, I've often said that part of the biggest part of our problem is that we've created a system that benefits the adults, but not the children, right? So if you're a dentist or a doctor or a lawyer and you do something that harms your client, you get sued, you lose your license. If you're a teacher but you don't teach your children how to read, there's no there's no ramification for that, right? There's no penalty for doing that. So as long as we have a system that's set up to benefit adults and not children, I think we'll continue to see this problem. But there are also lobbies. The school book publishers have lobbies that help them to get their materials adopted by a state and sold, whether or not it works for the children there or not. So there are so many different pieces of it. And then there's the piece that a lot of people don't want to talk about, and that is the American caste system, where people of color, particularly, are not benefited by the systems that are in place. And some of that is racism, whether people recognize it or not. Some of it is a bias towards people who are, and you hear this on our news all the time, but who are not, as they say, American. But America is a diverse country. Everybody who comes here, unlike many other countries, if you come to America, you're an American. So we're set up a little bit differently. But there are still those people who just they want to sustain a caste system very different from India's caste system, but a caste system all the same, where people of color in particular just are supposed to be oppressed, or they are oppressed because of that.
Right, right, Dr. Almitra. Now, you talked about the book lobby, that who are looking at their benefits. Book lobbies are everywhere in any part of the world. Wherever there is business, there will be one lobby or the other. And this is the fact of life, or the system that we devise for ourselves. One is that lobby. The
Well,
other
there's
is, yeah,
Go
carry on,
ahead. I'm sorry.
carry on,
There
carry on.
there is the American Publishing Association, which is a lobby. Individual school book publishers, and I worked for one for 16, 17 years. They have their own lobbyists. So I know from my work that when I could not get my materials listed, which is what they call it, in a state, a big state in particular, California, Texas, Florida, that I could talk to my lobbyist, and they would go to work doing what lobbyists do to find ways to get my materials listed so that schools could buy them using state money. And so fortunately, I feel good. I could sleep at night because I know that I had really good instructional materials that worked for the children that I'm talking about, but every publishing company has them. So if you can get your books listed, if you can do that backroom handshake deal, then people are buying your textbooks, and people don't realize that that is a multi-billion-dollar industry. There's a lot of money in school book textbooks.
Absolutely. So, obviously, the publishers won't go and pass the rules themselves. There must be a committee which is doing that.
Yes.
Who is choosing this committee? Don't Are they not accountable to anyone? US is a very open society. People, even if they don't respond to it, people still have the right to ask many questions. At least in the US, you won't get killed just for asking questions. So if you are
Not
asking
yet.
questions,
Not yet.
not yet. So if you are asking questions,
Sure.
are people asking questions? And what type and what are they answering? Because why not get those answers from them and let them answer that, listen, we have taken some money from somewhere for whatever reasons, for political funding or whatever it is, then let the truth come out. Am I sounding too simplistic?
No, you're not. And there are people who ask questions. And, as I said, right now, no, you won't get shot. But there are teachers who are getting fired. There are principals who are losing their jobs for standing up for what is right for children. So even though you may not be killed for what you do, you could lose your livelihood. The questions do get asked. The questions are often ignored, or they're laughed at, or it's simply, there are the people that are in power in making those decisions. And that varies. In some places it's a committee. In other places you volunteer. In some places you get selected to be on these committees that decide which books can be sold in the state. But there's still politics behind the scene, that we don't want these things sold in our state. There's a lot of right now, the United States public school systems have banned more books because of what is inside the book than Hitler did during the Third Reich. I mean, it's become a very charged system, and it's particularly charged against, like I said, our culturally and linguistically diverse people.
Right, right. So, I want to understand. Okay, fine. The committee is doing whatever it can. Others are doing what it can. What about the parents or the children? They are such a big business that there is a big lobby that has created a cartel sort of a thing that has been created.
Yeah,
So,
parent, go
if,
ahead.
if they can be big business, why can't they exert their power together? Don't parents have this big organization themselves where they can influence the education system? Can't they ask their governors? Can't they ask the president of the United States that, listen, you need to focus on these things rather than just speaking all the so many other things that you are talking during elections? Why are parents together as a group, as an association, so weak that they are not able to get this solved?
Well, there are parent organizations. Most people think about the PTA, the Parent Teacher Association, but they're not political in that sense. There are other organizations. I speak out on my podcast and in my blogs and writings all the time about a group that's harming children, and that is the Moms for Liberty. And yes, they are a parent group, but they're the ones that are trying to ban books and to keep books that show historical figures that are Black or Latino or Asian, keeping them out of school so children cannot learn true history or see themselves in their books. So yes, there are parent organizations, but again, the bottom line in America is it's a capitalist system, and the more money you have, the more power you have. So depending on where you are and who's behind you, if you've got enough money, um, that's who's going to get things changed. And the parents of the children that I'm focused on, the parents who are working 3 and 4 and 5 jobs to keep food on the table, the parents who recently immigrated to the country trying to find a better life for their children, they're not the ones with the money and the power. And the
Right.
president, as people think the American president is all powerful, not the way our system is set up. School decisions are made at the local level. So you've got the 50 states with 50 governors, and those 50 states each has a different system for how books are chosen for their state. So it's not something, and most of the funding, the money comes at the state level. So the president just doesn't have that type of power.
But the governor, state governor?
State governors do. State governors do have a tremendous amount of power over what happens to schools in their states. And we see that here, especially with the larger states and where books are being banned. The two biggest states are Florida and Texas, and those are powerful governors. But, again, they have an agenda, and theirs, unfortunately, is to sustain that caste system that's been set up to keep Black and brown children in a working class as they grow up. Undereducated, underinformed, and with not having an ability to climb a social ladder as readily as white children.
Right. So, what are the steps that you are recommending when you are talking about these things, Dr. Almitra? Because you need to provide solutions. So, you must
Yes,
be providing solutions.
I am. At least I'm trying. So part of my message, one message I all the time state is you have to vote. And you don't just go and vote for the president. It's so important that people understand what school boards do, because school boards make a lot of decisions and they're often elected by a very, very small percentage of the voters. So voting for school boards, voting for your state and local government people, in addition to voting for president. So voting all the way down the ticket, understanding what your rights are as a parent, going to school board meetings and voicing your concerns. As much as possible, showing up at the school for teacher parent meetings. But on the school side, what I say to them is they have to be welcoming of their parents. And if you have parents that do shift work or parents who work 2 and 3 jobs, you can't expect the parents to show up during the school day. You've got to have the schools open to support the communities that they're in. So if your parents are available at 8 o'clock at night, schools need to make themselves available at those times for parents to be able to work with them. So there are a lot of different things we can do, and I talk about those on my podcast, the Educational Equity Emancipation Podcast, to give people some guidance as well as some insights about what's going on.
Right, right. Uh, in terms of when you talk about educating children of color,
Mhm.
now, should they resign to the fate? their, like, whatever the system is trying to do, or should they then fight against, or in spite, despite everything, I will come up whatever it is. And when the numbers increase, the system starts speaking your language. How is the situation there? Is it getting better? Are things looking better? Is there support coming up for this sort of transformation in the education system?
Well, I'd like to say that it is, people are more aware now. If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't keep doing what I'm doing. So people are more aware, gaining followings, people that are starting, especially people who truly support public education for every single child, that are becoming more engaged in conversations. That part can happen. As far as any child coming up, I always say, look at me. I'm the child of two parents who came out of rural Arkansas, from towns that no one can find on a map. My parents were not college educated. Eventually, my mother did go to college. I went, my siblings went to college. So there is the ability, in spite of what they throw at you. But there have to be people supporting them. I was fortunate that I had a mom who understood how important education was, and basically had an attitude that you will not fail. This is what you're going to do. And one who would go rip a teacher to shreds if her child or her children were not getting what they needed in the classroom. But not all parents have that ability. And as a classroom teacher, when I was in the classroom, I knew that my parents did not necessarily feel comfortable coming to the school. Depending on what culture you come from, it's not the parent's place to go to the school and make a lot of noise about what their child is supposed to get. So part of my work is helping parents understand, yes, in this country, you can go to the schools, you can hold the teachers accountable, you can demand more for your child. The resources are there to support every single child. As parents, we need to make sure that we're holding our schools accountable. So I always tell, as I told my children, good enough was never good enough. You've got to keep doing more, and don't ever let anyone steal your dream or tell you that you can't be whatever it is you want to be.
Absolutely, absolutely. A lot of things are required, and you are doing a lot, including your book series, Effecting Change. Tell us a bit about what this book series is all about, and how can people make the best use of this book series?
Sure. So the book that is most widely in use right now is Affecting Change for Culturally and Linguistically Diverse Learners. You can pick that up on Amazon. I'm doing book study with folks on my podcast. It is designed for teachers to take a look at their instruction, what they're doing in the classroom, and make changes so that every single child in their classroom is successful. So I'm literally walking people through, here's what you do from day one. In the classroom. This is what reading instruction should look like. If you're having challenges with your children learning how to read, these are some steps that you can take. I talk about language, diversity of languages. So that book is really for getting teachers and schools started with having those conversations and creating communities of learning within their schools, professional practice. My second book that will be, or next book, it's actually the third that will be released this spring. We're still working on a title. We're doing a little bit of tweaks. So I just tell people, follow me at Almitra Berry anywhere on social, and you'll get the updates. Focuses more on the culture of the classrooms. And it, again, is like a guidebook for teachers and school administrators. Let's say, if I were, use this as an example, if I were to come to India to teach, I would need to learn a lot more about the culture than I currently do. I only know the culture from my friends who are in the United States who are Indian. I'm smiling from ear to ear because my first true exposure in college was a family next door. And we were poor college students, so we would stand next to the fence and just smell the dinner they were having every night as that curry smell came wafting over the fence. And they caught us one day and brought us in and welcomed us. So we learned a lot about their family and their culture. But if I were to come to that country, I would need to dive into it, really to learn who the children are, what their families are like, what they believe in, what they value, and what each child brings to school. That doesn't happen here in the United States. We have almost 80% of our teachers are white women, but 70% of our children are children of color. And so until those people go into those communities, sit in their churches, meet their families, go to their cultural events, you won't really be able to connect to your children. And that's such an important piece. And that's what that second book that's coming out this spring is about.
Wonderful, wonderful, Dr. Almitra. So there's so much to learn about these things from you, Dr. Almitra, and I'm sure a lot of people would be able to learn from your book series, the new book, as well as the work that you are doing, including the podcast. So, what is the best way for them to connect with you?
Well, I'm easy to find. I always said when my father gave me that name, it made it almost impossible for me to be invisible. So I am at Almitra Berry, whether it's LinkedIn, Twitter. No, I'm not on Twitter, X, not there. LinkedIn, Threads, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. And so if you follow me on any of those, you can direct message me. I always tell people direct message me on LinkedIn or TikTok. Those are the two that get the most traffic. And so we're constantly looking at those. You can listen to the podcast, the Educational Equity Emancipation Podcast, which is everywhere, including YouTube, Apple Podcast, Spotify, you name it, it's there. And in there is a link to text me directly. So you can click on that link and send me a text message, ask your questions. I love to use my listener questions as motivation for a topic on the show. So I am constantly engaging. Hard to miss me.
Wonderful, wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.